You're not invited. You can stay home and watch your son." My mother, Barbara, said that at Easter dinner in front of 23 relatives, while I was literally holding the check I'd written for her mortgage that month. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to beg. Instead, I smiled, and what I pulled out of my bag next made the entire table go silent for a very different reason. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe that being family isn't an excuse for toxicity. Also, I'd love to connect with you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I truly want to know, where in the world are you listening from? My name is Emily Miller. I'm 31, a single mom, and for the last 2.5 years, I was the invisible engine keeping my family afloat, until they made it very clear I was never actually part of the family. The routine was as steady as a heartbeat and just as vital. On the first of every month, after I put Noah to bed, I didn't collapse onto the sofa or pour a glass of wine. I sat at my small, laminate kitchen table, opened my laptop, and watched $2,400 vanish from my checking account. That money didn't go toward Noah's college fund or the dental work I'd been putting off. It went to the mortgage servicer for the house on Willow Creek. The colonial with the wraparound porch, the freshly mulched flower beds, and the American flag my father, Robert, hung every Memorial Day. My parents' house. The house I grew up in. This arrangement started 30 months ago. My father, a man who'd spent 40 years in construction supervision, finally had his body give out. 2 herniated discs. The doctor's orders were absolute. No work. My mother, Barbara, called me at 11 p.m. that night, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard. "Emily, we're going to lose the house. I don't know what to do." She asked if I could cover the mortgage just for a few months, until Dad got back on his feet. A few months turned into 30. I never missed a payment, but I didn't stop there. I became the family's unofficial back office. I handled their property tax installments, scheduled Robert's physical therapy, and renewed their car insurance when Barbara forgot. I was the safety net they didn't even realize they were jumping into every single day. Meanwhile, there was my older sister, Ashley. Ashley lived in a 2-bedroom in Murray Hill. She carried a designer bag that cost more than my monthly rent and spent her Sundays calling home to talk about her Pilates instructor or her latest weekend in the Hamptons. She contributed nothing. No money, no logistics, no time. Yet, when Barbara talked about her daughters, Ashley's name always came first. It was always, "Ashley is doing so well in the city." Never, "Emily is the reason we still have a roof over our heads." I drove a 2017 sedan with a dent in the bumper. Every time I pulled into my parents' driveway, I parked next to Ashley's leased luxury SUV, and every time I told myself the same thing. It doesn't matter. You're helping because it's the right thing to do. I kept every bank confirmation, every auto transfer receipt, and every invoice I paid. I didn't do it because I was planning a coup. I did it because I'm a bookkeeper by trade. I like records. But deep down, maybe I thought that someday someone would say, "Thank you." Nobody ever did. The shift began on a rainy Tuesday in early February. Barbara called, and her voice had that particular sugary sweetness she reserved for when she was about to ask for a favor. "Wonderful news, sweetheart," she chirped. "Ashley is engaged. Brandon proposed in Aspen. You should see the ring. It's massive." I felt a genuine flicker of happiness for her. "That's great, Mom. Congratulations." Then came the turn. "Now, honey, Ashley and I were talking. We need someone who understands budgets and bookings to handle the venue. You're so good with numbers, and I wouldn't even know where to begin with those European websites. They want a June wedding in Paris." I became the wedding planner for a destination I wasn't even sure I could afford to fly to. For 3 weeks, I spent my evenings researching venues in Montmartre. I found the one, a private mansion with a garden terrace and iron gates that looked like a postcard. It was $18,000 for the weekend. "The deposit is 50%, Emily," Barbara told me over the phone. "Ashley doesn't want the charge on her statement while she and Brandon are consolidating their accounts, and my credit limit isn't high enough. Can you put it on yours? We'll settle up later." I hesitated. My credit card was for emergencies. But I looked at a photo of my parents smiling in front of their house, the house I was saving, and I clicked confirm. $9,000 hit my statement instantly. A few days later, Ashley emailed me the preliminary guest list. I scrolled through the names of Brandon's wealthy relatives, my parents' friends, and Ashley's social circle. I reached the bottom. My name wasn't there. Noah's name wasn't there. I felt a cold shiver, but I brushed it off. It's a draft, I told myself. She just forgot. But then I remembered my college graduation, where they arrived 40 minutes late because Ashley had a hair emergency. I remembered when Noah was born, and Barbara stayed for 10 minutes before leaving to help Ashley move her sofa. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Total Family Contribution. I started entering the numbers. $72,000 in mortgage payments, $9,000 for a French villa, $4,000 in property taxes. The total was climbing towards six figures. I sat back, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I stopped feeling like a good daughter. I started feeling like a line item that was about to be deleted. The discovery didn't happen with a dramatic shout. It happened in the clinical, cold glow of a computer screen at 1 a.m. When Barbara asked me to coordinate with the venue in Paris, she'd handed over her email login so I could manage the mess. She never bothered to change the password. I was only there to find the catering invoice, but a subject line caught my eye. June arrangements, guest considerations. The sender was Susan Wright, Brandon's mother. It was a polite, upper-crust email asking if there were any dietary restrictions for the immediate family. Then I saw my mother's reply, dated weeks before she'd even asked me to pay the deposit. Emily won't be attending, Barbara had written. She's always been a bit of a homebody, and she's not particularly comfortable in formal settings. It's best for everyone if she sits this one out. She's much happier staying behind with her son. I stared at the words until they blurred. Comfortable in formal settings? I had a degree in accounting. I navigated corporate boardrooms for a living. The homebody she was describing was a fiction she'd created to explain away my absence to her new, wealthy in-laws. She wasn't just leaving me out. She was preemptively erasing me so I wouldn't clutter the image of the family she wanted to present to the Wrights. And she did it while I was still paying the mortgage on the bed she slept in. A few days later, the official blow came. I called Ashley, trying to give her one last chance to be a sister. Hey Ash, I was looking over the guest list for the mansion. I noticed Noah and I aren't on there. Is there a separate list for family? There was a long, heavy silence. I could almost hear her checking her manicured nails on the other end. Oh, Mom said she talked to you about that. The floor seemed to tilt. I hung up and called Barbara immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice breezy. Mom, I just talked to Ashley. What's going on with the guest list? Her tone shifted instantly. It wasn't apologetic, it was patronizing, the way you'd talk to a toddler who didn't understand why they couldn't have candy. Sweetie, it's a very intimate ceremony. Brandon's family has certain expectations. They're very high society, Emily. A single mother with a young child. It's just not the aesthetic Ashley is going for. Besides, someone needs to stay back and look after the house, and Noah would be so bored in Paris. Aesthetic. My life, my struggle, and my son were aesthetics that didn't fit her brand. I see, I said, my voice eerily calm. So I'm good enough to book the mansion, but not good enough to stand in it? Don't be dramatic, Barbara snapped. You're being helpful. That's what you're good at. Now let's talk about Easter. I need you to handle the catering for 30 people. You know Ashley and I can't be bothered with the kitchen when we have so much planning to do. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply said, I'll handle it, Mom. That afternoon, I went to an office supply store and bought a thick manila folder. I went home and printed everything. Every auto transfer of $2,400 from the last 30 months. The $18,000 venue contract with my signature. The screenshots of the emails where she'd sold me out to the Wrights. I sat at my kitchen table and watched Noah play with his toy cars on the rug. He was wearing a t-shirt I'd bought at a thrift store so I could afford my parents' property taxes. I felt a surge of protective rage that surpassed anything I'd ever felt for myself. I reached out to my Uncle David, the black sheep, who had moved to Georgia years ago and stopped coming to holidays. When he answered, I told him everything. Emily, David said, his voice gravelly and wise. I left because I realized that in that family, love is a transaction, but they never let your currency be enough. You're not a daughter to her. You're an interest-free loan. What are you going to do? I'm going to Easter dinner, I replied, and I'm bringing the receipts. The week leading up to Easter, I was a ghost. I stopped answering texts. I stopped checking the Paris-June group chat I'd discovered I was excluded from. I spent my time at work, securing a transfer to our new satellite office in Savannah, a move I'd been offered but had previously declined because I felt I needed to stay close to help my parents. By the time Easter Sunday arrived, I was no longer the girl who swallowed her feelings. I was a woman with a closing statement. I dressed Noah in a sharp little suit. I put on a navy blazer that made me feel like the professional I was. I tucked the manila folder into my bag. As I pulled into the driveway on Willow Creek, I saw Ashley's luxury SUV and the rental cars of distant cousins. The house looked beautiful. The lawn was green, the flowers were blooming, and the porch was pristine. It looked like a home where people loved each other. It was a beautiful lie, and I was the one who had paid for the paint. The dining room on Willow Creek was a masterpiece of suburban perfection. Barbara had outdone herself. Cream-colored linens, gold-rimmed china, and a centerpiece of fresh tulips that smelled like a spring morning. 23 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, and the in-laws-to-be, sat around a table that creaked under the weight of a feast I had coordinated. I sat at the far end, the service seat closest to the kitchen. Noah was beside me, swinging his legs and eyeing the dinner rolls. Across from me, Ashley looked radiant, flashing her diamond ring every time she took a sip of sparkling cider. Barbara stood at the head of the table, tapping her glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. Everyone, Barbara beamed, her eyes shining with practiced joy. We have so much to celebrate. In just 2 months, we'll be flying to Paris for the wedding of the season. Ashley and Brandon are starting their lives together in the most beautiful city in the world, and we are so blessed to be going with them. Applause rippled through the room. Uncle Pete whistled. Aunt Linda clapped her hands. Wait, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a cold blade. I didn't raise my voice, but the tone made everyone freeze. What was the date again, Mom? Barbara's smile didn't drop, but it sharpened. She tilted her head, giving me that pitying look. Oh, sweetie, you're not invited. You can stay home and watch Noah. We've already discussed this. It's just not your scene. The table went dead silent. Forks stayed midair. Aunt Linda's mouth actually dropped open. They all expected me to do what I'd always done. Blush, look down at my plate, and apologize for the misunderstanding. Instead, I smiled. It was the most honest smile I'd worn in 3 years. Actually, Mom, I said, reaching into my Coach tote, I have an announcement too. I pulled out the manila folder and slid it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the glazed ham. I opened the first tab. Since we're talking about Paris, let's talk about the venue, I said, sliding a document toward Brandon's parents. The Montmartre estate, $18,000 for the weekend. Here is the contract. As you'll see, it's in my name, my signature, my credit card. I've paid the deposit that allowed this dream to exist. Ashley's face went from tan to ghostly pale in seconds. Emily, stop it. This is tacky. Tacky is taking $18,000 from your sister and then telling her she's not the right aesthetic for your wedding, I replied, my voice steady. I turned the page to the second tab, a thick stack of yellow highlighted bank statements. And Dad, I looked at Robert, who was staring at his hands. For the last 30 months, I've paid the mortgage on this house. $2,400 every single month. Property taxes, insurance, the plumber you called last Christmas. The total comes to $72,000 in mortgage payments alone. Combined with the wedding costs, I have invested $98,000 into this family in 2.5 years. The whispers started. 98,000? Uncle Pete muttered, looking at Robert with an expression of pure shock. Emily, you volunteered, Barbara hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. That's what family does. You're being incredibly selfish right now. I volunteered to help you because you told me you were losing your home, I said, standing up. I didn't volunteer to be your ATM while being treated like a shameful secret. I've seen the emails, Mom. I know you told the Wrights I was a homebody who didn't want to come so you wouldn't have to explain a single mother in your perfect Paris photos. I closed the folder with a snap. The mortgage payment scheduled for May 1st? I've canceled the auto transfer. You have 30 days to find a way to pay for this roof. And the Paris venue? Since the contract is in my name, I'll be calling the coordinator tomorrow morning to cancel the reservation and reclaim my refund. You can't! Ashley shrieked. My wedding is in 8 weeks! Then I suggest you use some of that high society money to find a new place, I said, because my homebody money is officially retired. I picked up Noah's jacket. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my chair sliding back. Barbara looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She tried to speak, but for once her sugared words failed her. Noah, let's go, I said softly. We walked out of that house and didn't look back. As I buckled Noah into his car seat, my phone started vibrating in my pocket, call after call, text after text. I didn't answer a single one. For 30 months, I had been the invisible foundation of that house. I had finally realized that if you spend your life being a doormat, people will only ever notice you when you're gone. The drive to Savannah was the quietest 5 hours of my life, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like a clean slate. As the moss-draped live oaks of Georgia began to arch over the highway, I felt the weight of Willow Creek falling away in the rearview mirror. I had officially moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the Victorian district. It wasn't a mansion in Paris, and it didn't have a wraparound porch, but every square inch of it belonged to me. There were no hidden mortgages, no predatory favors, and no aesthetics to maintain. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't bracing for a phone call that would drain my bank account. The aftermath of Easter dinner had been a firestorm. My phone had buzzed so incessantly that I eventually had to change my number. Before I did, I listened to one final voicemail from Barbara. Her voice wasn't sugary anymore. It was sharp with desperation. You're ruining this family, Emily. Ashley is devastated. The Wrights think we're a joke. How could you be so cruel over money? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Cruelty wasn't asking for my money back. Cruelty was taking it for 30 months while pretending the person giving it didn't exist. 3 weeks after I settled into my new office at the Savannah branch, a plain white envelope arrived. No return address. I opened it to find a handwritten letter from my father, Robert. Emily, it began. I've spent a lot of nights staring at the ceiling in this new townhouse. We had to sell the Colonial. We couldn't make the payments, and the bank wouldn't restructure without your income. Your mother is working at a florist shop now. Ashley and Brandon got married at a small restaurant near the Seine. It wasn't what she wanted, and I think the tension with the Wrights is something they'll be dealing with for a long time. He went on. I'm writing because I realized I was a coward. I let your mother build a world where you were the help, and Ashley was the star because it was easier than fighting. I let you pay for my roof while I sat in the garage and ignored the truth. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I see you now. I finally see everything you did. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to call him, but I didn't throw it away. It was the first time a debt had been acknowledged without a request for more. The real closure came in August. I was sitting on my small balcony, watching Noah play with a bubble machine, when an email popped up from a name I hadn't seen in months. Ashley. There was no, I'm sorry. There was no, how are you? Just a digital invoice for $7,000. The difference in cost for the replacement venue she'd had to book at the last minute. At the bottom, a note from Barbara. This is the debt you owe your sister for the stress you caused. Please Venmo her at your earliest convenience. I stared at the screen for a moment, and then I started to laugh. It was a deep, soul-cleansing laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall was almost impressive. They were still trying to use the same old tools, guilt and obligation, on a woman who had already broken the lock. I didn't type a long, angry response. I didn't remind them of the $98,000. I simply hit delete and blocked the address. My life in Savannah became a series of firsts. The first time I bought a dress just because I liked it. The first time Noah had a birthday party where he was the center of attention, not an afterthought. The first time I sat at my kitchen table on the first of the month and realized that my money was staying exactly where it belonged, in my son's future. I used to think that being a good daughter meant being a martyr. I thought if I gave enough, eventually, the love would be equal to the sacrifice. But you can't buy a seat at a table where you aren't valued. You have to build your own table. Now, when I look at Noah, I see a child who knows his mother is strong, not a doormat. And when I look in the mirror, I don't see a homebody or an aesthetic failure. I see Emily Miller. I'm an accountant, a mother, and for the first time in 31 years, I'm free. Protect your peace, everyone, because if you don't value your own worth, no one else will do it for you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Emily's story is a powerful reminder that setting boundaries isn't a betrayal of family. It is an act of self-preservation. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly shouldn't be the foundation for people who refuse to acknowledge your presence. If this story hit home, please hit the like button and subscribe to join our community. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose yourself over a toxic situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and as always, protect your peace. I'll see you in the next one.